Good afternoon, friends. Thanks so much for making the time to be a part of this. I'm very encouraged by the strong interest that we're seeing across the diocese. So let's begin with prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for the fellowship that we share in this diocese, and we thank you for all that you have provided for us, the resources that you give us for the work of mission. And we want, Lord, to be faithful stewards of all that you have entrusted to us. And so I ask that you would be very present to us on this call, speak to us and teach us as we talk and share about insurance and how it might work for us to band together to do that more effectively and more efficiently. Lead us by your Holy Spirit, raise up the questions that you would have us ask, and give us keen insight into the issues that face each of our churches. So help us and encourage us and use this time for your kingdom purposes, Father. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thanks again for coming aboard and being a part of this call. We're blessed to be able to talk about what I think is a very positive and worthwhile proposal for us to ponder together. We're talking about having a master policy for insurance coverage for churches that want to participate, as well as for the diocese and its needs as well. The purpose of this would be to provide consistent coverage for every participating church and for the diocese to ensure that we'd have adequate coverage and limits to meet everyone's needs, that we would be able to negotiate and purchase insurance for the diocese and for each participating church to get the best coverage at the lowest price, and to eliminate the very real possibility of unintended gaps in coverage. I know churches always struggle about, do we have the right coverage, or should we have insurance for this, and how much? And this would ensure appropriate levels of coverage and eliminate the risk that would actually extend to all of us across the diocese. We've got with us on the call, you'll hear more about them in a minute, from Rod Barber, who has been involved with the Anglican Church in North America and its predecessor groups, particularly on the Risk Management and Benefits Committee of the ACNA, and Jim Dickenson of Frost Insurance. Frost Insurance has been providing insurance for the ACNA and for lots and lots of churches since, again, before the ACNA was actually formed. But first, I want to turn it over to Lynn Miligrano, whom I think most of you know, administrator of the diocese. And she is not only going to sort of facilitate this call, but I want you all to realize that she's very much the point person for follow-up to this call, as well as to work to form a formal diocesan risk management committee, something we need but don't yet have. So let me turn it over to you, Lynn.
Thank you, Bishop John. Good afternoon, everyone. Before we get started, I wanted to take a brief minute to talk about how we're going to manage today's call. We're going to handle this presentation very much like a webinar. So everyone's microphone will be muted except for our presenters. Our meeting today is being recorded, and we plan to post it on the DOMA website. So if you prefer not to be recorded, simply mute your video. But we wanted to make this presentation available to those people who might not be able to join us this afternoon. So we're going to post this link to our webpage in the Zoom chat. It's www.anglicandoma.org/insurance. And we're going to have the video presentation and all the documents you'll see on your screen posted there. So speaking of the group chat, we're going to be using the chat window to ask our questions to the presentation today. So I want to make sure everyone knows how to access that feature. If you've not used chat before, hover your cursor over the bottom of your Zoom screen. You'll see the word chat and an icon pop up. simply click that and your chat window will open, and at the bottom of the chat window you'll see the place where you can type in your question. And I would encourage you to type in questions just as they occur to you during the presentation. We won't interrupt the presentation, but we will gather them, sort them, and make sure we cover them during the Q&A at the end of the meeting. So with that, now I'd like to welcome once again our presenters, Jim Dickenson and Rod Barber. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but I wanted you to know that between them, Jim and Rod have over 70 years of a career experience in insurance and risk management. So for those of you joining us, you get the chance to hear from two very highly informed individuals on the subject and two people who really care for the church and for serving church leaders. So Jim, I'm going to hand it over to you to walk us through this important topic.
Thank you so very much. I must say, I know that if I were with you all physically, I would be humbled and honored to be with you, but quite comfortable in making a presentation. I have to tell you that though I've done a number of these Zoom calls, I've not done one with this many people participating before. And while I am humbled and honored, I'm somewhat intimidated. But having said that, I know that we will get through this just fine. Thank you all for taking the time today and your interest in our comments and our presentation and the information we have to share with you. It's just so that you'll know kind of my role. I am an insurance broker and risk management consultant with Frost Insurance, and again, I'm very honored and blessed to say that I have the opportunity to represent literally hundreds of ACNA congregations around the country, and it's really quite personally fulfilling. Rod Barber, who is with us as well. Rod is, I can't say he's a former colleague because I still consider him a colleague, even though he's recently retired. He and I work very closely together on a number of initiatives. And I guess before I go any further, Rod, would you like to introduce yourself? A couple comments.
Very short. I would say I've been involved in the ACNA, as the good Bishop John said, since before we were called the ACNA. Been involved. I'm currently involved with Alan Hawkins and with regards Canon Hawkins with regards to enterprise risk management, and wherever else I'm needed working on child protection at the very moment. I've done a lot in our diocese, the Diocese of Fort Worth. I'm chair of the Risk Management Committee. I'm on the Board of Trustees, Standing Committee, past chair of the Camp Board. And in retirement, my mission is to move the ACNA and our churches along with regards to how we're handling risk management and the purchase of insurance. We're a little bit behind some of the more mature denominations, and that's an area of need. And so that's kind of why I'm here today, because I'm charged with and I'm currently trying to move that process along so that we're all better protected. One of the things we have coming down the road would be a survey of your diocese that your risk management committee would send to you, and that your risk management committee is not formed yet, but we've got one done, and it would be asking the churches what's important to them with regards to protecting their mission and our great commandment of teaching the word and spreading the word. So with that, that's all you need to know about me. It's way more more said there than necessary. Hand it back to Jim or Lynn, and let's get this thing started.
Okay, with that, I'm going to move ahead and share our screen with the agenda. At least I am going to try to. Well, Lynn, this is quite interesting. Oh, here we go. Maybe we're going to get to share now.
Good.
You test drive before everyone gets on, and it works perfectly. Okay. You all should be viewing the agenda document now.
I don't think you've selected there you go.
I'll wait just a moment and see if anyone has trouble seeing, but you should see a document that reads at the top, the Diocese of Mid-Atlantic and Frost Insurance, Risk Management and Insurance. You have that, Lynn?
Yes, we do.
Okay, we do. All right. You can see that we've already accomplished items 1, 2, and 3, so we are well on our way. So I'll drop down to Roman numeral 4. The advantages of a diocesan master risk management and insurance program. So, why are we convinced that this is a really superior way for a diocese to at least invite their congregations or churches to participate in a singular insurance program? And I could read this to you, but you'll see a shared program. It helps us improve coverage and limits on an insurance program at improved costs. Purchasing in mass versus individually gives us the greater advantage to leverage property rates and the coverage. Again, purchasing in mass versus individually, we get better coverage terms and conditions. It ensures that all the congregations that are participating in the program have the appropriate coverage as they need individually, certainly as that relates to property insurance, because that's certainly going to be unique to each and every church. And then finally, quality control insurance, and the idea being that you have, for the purposes of all the participating churches within the diocesan program, you have one point of contact. You have one individual who is managing the program for you, and you have consistency then across each of those churches. So that's the general idea here, and just quite simply put, any one church who would want to go out and arrange the kind of robust insurance coverage that we would recommend that a church has. Any one church does that on their own. Ultimately, we know that you're going to find that the cost for doing that is going to be significantly greater than if you come together as a family and purchase insurance coverage. Again, consistent across each of the churches. You'll get the same level of coverage, but at reduced cost. Lynn, any other comments or ideas that you'd like me to share before we move on?
No, I think we can go on to the next document.
Okay. Bear with me, please. You should be seeing a document that says property and casualty insurance recommended coverage for churches. Okay. As we were preparing for this presentation, either the end of last week or earlier this week, one or the other, I was suggesting to Lynn that I had been coached, some time ago, that when you make a PowerPoint presentation, you want your slides to be brief and simple with a few bullet points. And I know that I'm absolutely violating that coaching with this, but what we wanted to do here is give you all the kind of detail and that you can, because I'm not going to go through this document in detail, but have the kind of detail that you all could look back at a later date when you want to spend more time consuming, again, this level of detail that's here for you. But what I would suggest to you is we think it's important with respect to the insurance broker, agent, partner that you use in your insurance and risk management process. Make sure that they've got the kind of credentialing and professional experience that you want, that you need. As Lynn mentioned, together, Rod and I have been doing this for a long time. And we're blessed to have tremendous experience with religious organizations of all kinds, including churches. Certainly the insurance companies that you use, that's critically important to us. We simply don't allow our clients to have insurance coverage with companies that are rated less than A minus by AM Best. And again, if someone has particular questions about that, I'm happy to respond to them. Below in the property section then, again, without going into detail on each one of these items, I can tell you that through our experience over a number of years, we are convinced that these kinds of terms and conditions from a coverage standpoint are very important to you. They should be very important to you. And again, if someone has particular questions about any of these details, I'm happy to address those. I'm going to slide down a little bit to general liability. So we would make sure that every church that participates in the program would have, again, the same level of liability coverage as to general liability, professional liability, sexual abuse and molestation, directors and officers liability, and those kinds of things. I'll move down to the automobile. I know most of you all probably do not have autos that you own or lease in the name of your church. That's okay. But we still know that all of you have a hired and non-owned auto liability exposure. And so we would make sure that you have at least 1 million per occurrence on the non-owned and hired auto liability. For those of you that have the employees, workers' compensation. And then executive risk or directors and officers employment practices coverage. You know, every church and their vestry, their leaders, their employees, their clergy, you have exposures to liability claims arising out of what is termed in the policy as wrongful acts. So this is coverage that is not for claims involving bodily injury. This is instead claims for allegations that you made mistakes in your role as leaders, maybe in your fiduciary responsibility to your churches. That's what this coverage is for. Again, critically important. And then umbrella or excess liability of $5 million for each claim and $5 million aggregate. And we would construct this so that it has the flexibility to sit above the general liability, the auto liability, professional liability, the abuse, so that you have at least $6 million for any one of those claims. My sense is a number of you are probably, when you hear those numbers, you know, $1 million for each primary liability coverage and $5 million on excess. If you're a smaller church, a smaller congregation, you may likely be thinking to yourself, wow, that's a lot of limit for a small church like ours. And in and of itself, maybe. I can tell you that from a severity standpoint, this is what concerns us the most, auto liability, from purely a severity, because, you know, quite honestly, you know, in the blink of an eye, in a moment, you know, you could cause an auto accident that could well exceed 1 million in costs, and as well as the 5 million in excess that we would suggest that you all have. But still, $6 million is pretty healthy limit for any one kind of liability claim. And quite frankly, the other issue that of concern for churches in our religious organization clients is the sexual misconduct and abuse allegations. Again, those kinds of claims can be extremely expensive, particularly if they do have, you know, any kind of merit. But even without merit, you know, the cost to defend yourselves can be pretty significant.
Jim,
so that's a brief summary. Yes, sir.
Could I throw in something there with regards to the church in Breckenridge? And,
Please do.
The church in Breckenridge here in our diocese, a gentleman called me while I was still working. So it was last fall, late summer or early last fall, and said, I'm an oil and gas man, Breckenridge, Texas. I see we have these real big limits. I don't see how we need these, and couldn't we save some money if we had lower limits? Our little old church didn't have but 75 people on a Sunday, so I don't know that we need this. We had a nice conversation, and in very short order, I showed him some of the things that Jim was sharing with you, that those limits are for all of us, and in buying together, we're buying that very effectively. He said, that's interesting. Let me call a friend that handles our insurance for the oil and gas company. He called me back a couple of days later and he said, hey, for what we're paying, we're stealing this. I'll talk at your next workshop and tell everybody what a great deal that we're getting, because this is wonderful. So in looking at the detail, it became he's a advocate for the risk management program in the Diocese of Fort Worth. Now, I just wanted to share that because of something you said in the introduction part of this one part, Jim. If you go ahead and go back to your agenda.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rod. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the whys and the leverage and what we would recommend to you from an insurance coverage standpoint. I'm going to go ahead and move over to an exhibit now that will show you an example of a diocesan program that we manage and the kinds of coverage that are embedded within this actual insurance program for this client, and then show you some examples of costs associated for a few specific parishes and kind of the characteristics of those parishes, so that you can, those churches, so that you can kind of compare them to your own circumstance and situations. So again, this exhibit, it highlights the various coverage terms and conditions that in our recommended insurance coverage exhibit that we think are important. Including this particular case, these folks have $1 million in flood coverage and $1 million in earthquake coverage. I can tell you that, typically speaking, property insurance policies for churches may not include flood and earthquake. We have it included in this program. Again, it's one of the benefits of buying in bulk and having that leverage. I'm going to slide on down rather than have you all get buried in the weeds there on the details of coverage. But I slid too far. Let's go back up. Okay, this is the property section continued. Liability, again, $1 million per claim and $2 million annual aggregate with personal injury and advertising injury, and then employee benefits. Here's a professional liability for our pastoral counseling, $1 million per claim and $3 million aggregate. And then in this case, sexual abuse and molestation coverage is $1 million per claim and $1 million aggregate. Sliding down further. Management liability. Again, this is coverage that's important for the leaders of our churches. So the directors and officers liability, employment practices are $1 million each. We have internet liability in this one, $1 million, and then workplace violence, $1 million. Here's the auto liability, $1 million per claim. Workers' compensation, employers' liability portion is $1 million per claim. In this particular program, these folks do have $5 million in excess or umbrella coverage. Again, so it's over the general liability, the auto liability, professional, employee benefits, and the sexual abuse. Below, crime. So this is theft of money. Gosh, we hope it never happens, but sometimes it does. I was meeting with a small church here locally a few years ago, and we got into a conversation about crime coverage and theft of money, and I asked a very simple control, operational control. I said, so you do have 2 people who count the offering, each week? Oh, no, sir, no. We have, Sister Mary does that, really? And so, you really should have 2 people. Oh, yeah, we know that, but you go tell Sister Mary. I'm not doing that. But in this particular program, we have $100,000 in theft of money. So again, the idea is a very robust, comprehensive insurance program offering for all the churches that are in this particular diocese. And then as we look to cost, so what does it cost a particular church in this diocese to participate in this program? I want to stop first and explain that the way that the costs, let me back up one further. Insurance company underwriters are going to consider, because this is going to be what we're proposing would be a singular insurance program for all the participating churches. So you would all have coverage under the property policy, the general liability policy, the auto and the professional, and the abuse and the management liability, and so on. The way that we go about assuring that each and every church has access to the full coverage and limits is we would go through and have the insurance company endorse a policy to show that each and every congregation, each and every church is an additional named insured on the policy, so that you all have the full protection and coverage afforded these policies. So the insurance company then, with that in mind, the insurance company is going to evaluate insurance costs, the underwriting, the premium development to the diocese as a whole body, a singular whole body. So the property coverage is based primarily upon the total insured values. The general liability premium is based primarily upon square footage that you occupy, whether you own your building or you lease your building, or someone allows you to use their space. Auto liability is based upon either autos that you own And if you don't own autos, then everyone has an equal share of the premium for the hired and unowned liability. The workers' compensation is specific to each church. So if you have employees, then you're going to pay exactly your portion of the workers' comp premium for the policy, not anyone else's. Same thing with the professional liability and the abuse and molestation and the executive liability or director's and officer's liability. So what we do is we apportion then the premium to each church, let's say in particular as it relates to the property. Let's just say for discussion's sake that if we take all the churches who participate in your program, and let's just say, for example, the total insured values for property totals up to $10 million. It's easy math for me. And your particular church is one of the larger churches, and happens to have $1 million of the total of 10. Well, your church is going to get the proportionate share of the premium as it relates to the proportionate share of the total insured values. In this scenario, in this example, the church I'm describing would have $1 million in insured values, so that's 10% of the total. They would get 10% of the premium. And then we would do the same thing as it relates to the general liability, the professional liability, the director's and officer's liability on down the line. Okay. So with that in mind, what I've done on this exhibit, and again, you all can go back and take another look and hover on this a little bit further if you need to, but I've tried to simply identify churches in this particular program that meet different kind of characteristics that you all might experience. So the first church is one that happens to own their own building. It's insured at $2 million. It's 10,000 plus square feet. They also have 235,000 in business personal property. They don't own any autos, but they have hired and unowned auto liability, and they pay a little bit of premium for that. This particular church shows annual revenue on their reporting of $87,000, and their annual premium for their share of the premium for the total in this particular diocesan program is $10,000. If you compare that to the next church example, this church also owns a building. Actually, they have two buildings. In this case, it's the church building and a detached garage. But in this case, it's $485,000 in building coverage. You see $63,000 in business personal property. So that's all the stuff inside the church. It occupies 2,100 square feet. Again, they don't own autos, smaller income. Their total annual premium for their proportionate share is $2,700. So you see a significant difference. And the idea is these folks only have $485,000 in property coverage, and they occupy 2,100 square feet. This church is $2 million plus in values. They occupy 10,000 square feet, so their proportionate share is a little bit higher. Go to the third example. This church does not own a building. They lease space. They lease 4,000 square feet. They have only $20,000 in replacement cost value of their business personal property. So that's furniture, fixtures, equipment, investments, whatever that might be. No owned autos. Annual income of about $34,000, and their premium is $1,400 a year. And then finally, in the fourth example, again, a very small church with they are leasing space. They have 1,600 square feet that they lease. They have $5,300 in property, no autos, $17,000 in income. Their annual premium is $658. So what's important to understand here is while this church spends $658 per year for all the coverage that's described in this exhibit above, this church spends $1,400, this church spends $2,700, and this one $10,000 plus. But they all have the benefit of the $1 million in general liability and auto liability and abuse, pastoral counseling, professional liability, the director's officers, employment practices, workers' compensation if they have employees, their property insurance, and also the $5 million in excess or umbrella limits that attaches to each of those primary coverages that I described before. So hopefully that makes sense. And as you see these church characteristics that helps you to think more about your own congregation, your own church, and kind of where you might fit. I'm not here to suggest to you that if you happen to be one of these churches that your characteristics are exactly like this, that this is going to be exactly your premium. But again, this is one true example of a diocesan program that we manage today. The kind of leverage the coverage I've described, and then again the premiums associated with each. Rod, do you have comments that you want to add there?
I'm sure I will. It may be better served to handle that when we have in the Q&A. The only thing I would say is that the exact coverages that you end up purchasing will be driven by your risk management committee, not because Jim and I think that you need, X and directors and officers. You may think you need more than that or less than that. So it is driven by customizing the formula for your church, and your diocese. So
Jim,
have the same coverage, but it's in the program. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask Jim before we leave this screen. Had a couple questions, so I think it would be helpful to address it now. Can you clarify, for example, in example 1, there is a church with an annual income of $87,000, and I recognize this is just an example, but if their operating income is $87,000, would their premium actually be $10,000? I mean, that's a big chunk of their annual income there. Is that just because of the building?
I would suggest to you a couple of things. One, with this particular diocese, we're relying upon parochial reports that are trailing, number one. Number two, I would, the reality is, I'm going to take the data that is reported to us as being true, accurate, and correct, and we're going to pass that data on to the insurance company underwriters. In this particular example, and Rod pointed out the same thing as I prepared this exhibit this last week, he had the exact same comment. Man, that's a big portion of their annual budget that's going to premium. This is an anomaly. I'm going to suggest to you that in this case, this church's annual income is significantly greater than $87,000. It's the way it was reported to us. That's the way that we send it on to the insurance companies. And then for the purposes of this exhibit, again, I just wanted to reflect this true example for this particular diocese. And
would annual income, would that be their operating income? That's
yes. Yeah. And I put this characteristic on each of these churches because the operating income is really going to be the primary basis of the director's officer's liability and employment practices liability coverage, insurance coverage for the diocesan program. The idea being, the higher the budget, the larger the budget, the more likely it is, simply from an underwriting perspective, insurance companies would look at it and say, a church that has a much higher operating budget is maybe more likely to have a director's officer type of claim than one, on the lower end of that spectrum.
Good. That's helpful. I know we have a few other more detailed questions about this, but I want to get on to the next part of it, and we'll wrap up with and address some of those questions at the end.
Thank you. I think we're doing pretty good on time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to move ahead then to the agenda. It talks about next steps. Next steps is information gathering. And you all should be seeing a document that says Frost Religious Organization Insurance Program. So this is, quite honestly, is perhaps our largest challenge, is gathering the data and all the information that would be necessary for underwriters to evaluate the insurance program for the diocese and do their underwriting, do their pricing, and so on. This is a general questionnaire form, and again, I don't need to go through and read all this to you. I would suggest to you that as we move forward, if your congregation, your church does want to consider participating in our program, the diocesan program, we do need for you to complete this questionnaire. I don't want you to get bogged down in it. I don't want you to waste time in it. If I would suggest that you look at it like, it's been a long time, but my recollection is when I took like an SAT test a long time ago, the idea was answer the ones you know. If you don't know it, skip it and come back, right? Don't waste your time on it. So that's what I would suggest to you all. I don't want anyone wasting any time on this questionnaire. If you get to something that you don't know, skip it, give me a call, and I bet that we can pretty quickly run through it over the telephone. It'll be much more efficient than you dwelling on things that maybe don't make sense to you. There's certainly a great deal of insurance verbiage and terminology in here. And again, I don't want anyone to bog. You see my contact information at the bottom here. It's also included on the agenda document that we opened with. So this is one questionnaire that we would need for you all to complete for us. Then there's a second. And in fact, I want to show you up here. There's a second questionnaire that we reference here, small church, DNO, Directors and Officers Liability Application. So we're going to want you to complete this next one as well, and I'll share that with you. So you should see an application form at the top says Philadelphia Insurance Companies. And this is a really brief Directors and Officers Liability Questionnaire, but it's the kind of questionnaire that will allow us to, that we can share with insurance company underwriters, that will allow us and allow them to begin their analysis. And same comments, a lot of language in here that may not be familiar to you. I don't want you to get bogged down. Call me and we'll talk about it. We can go through it probably much more efficiently than you would be on your own. You know the answers, great, put them in. The other thing I would suggest to you as it relates to these questionnaires, it would be great if we could get them both fully completed, submit both at the same time rather than piecemeal. It'll help us stay organized a little easier as we move forward with hopefully a large number of the churches looking at participation. And those will be the first two. And no doubt insurance companies will have other questions that may or may not need to be directed to each of the potential participating congregations and churches. It may be that we're able to address those and work through those with Lynn and the diocesan office directly. If there's something that we do need from the individual churches, we'll certainly get those to you. Rod, other thoughts, comments about applications and information gathering?
There were some questions that were posted in the chat. We might go over there, Jim. Okay.
Lynn, you have other thoughts or questions here before we move over to the questions?
No, I don't. If you wanna go through some Q&A now, or do you want to wait till the end?
That should be all of the content, I believe. Let me get back to our agenda item.
Yeah, under next steps, you've got gather the data, continue your current insurance pending the initial master policy, and then we were going to address the risk management committee.
Thank you.
I think that's probably your intention, is it not, Lynn? To
I
have
would love to talk about that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, thank you, Rod, for that reminder. It is important, please, for everyone who's listening and participating in this call. It is important to understand that we will make it explicitly clear, abundantly clear to all of you when the program, if we develop this program for you all, when it is ready to launch, when the coverage will begin. And having said that, then it's also very important that you continue your current insurance program until you have that option presented to you and the program is ready to launch. It will take some time for us to gather all the data from each of the churches who would like to consider participation. So, I would suggest to you that we will likely work through this project, and that's really what it is. We'll likely work through this project through probably most of the summer, I would suggest to you that at the earliest, the most likely launch date, when we get this program put together for you all, would be around September 1st. So we're not going to rush into this. We want to make sure that we get all of the information, that we answer all of your questions, that each of you have the opportunity, should you wish to consider participation, fully understanding the options and comparing it to what you're doing individually. So please keep the current coverage going. The insurance company loss runs are referenced here. Those are going to be important. We're going to need them. I would suggest to you, let's get the questionnaires, let's get those completed, get those submitted, and we will then circle back to you and let you know when we need you to reach out to your current insurance brokers, your current insurance agents, and request those 5 years of insurance coverage loss history. And we'll need those for each line of coverage that you all have had for your individual congregations, again, for the past 5 years. And then finally, as it relates to next steps, the risk management committee. Again, I have to tell you that I have been amazed, quite honestly, by the value that has been brought to the risk management insurance program for the Diocese of Fort Worth. The Diocese of Fort Worth is really blessed and fortunate to have experienced and skilled professionals who, in various roles, various capacities, who serve in their committee, a retired attorney, clergy, the canon to the ordinaries involved. We've had an insurance company underwriter. We've had an insurance company adjuster who has great experience and has been a tremendous asset. And Rod, as a longtime insurance risk management professional, and then I chime in with my opinions when I'm asked. But I can't overemphasize the value of a risk management committee to you all. And I know that Bishop John and Lynn are looking forward to developing that role within your diocese. It's just a tremendous advisory body that has served, I know, the Diocese of Fort Worth well. Rod, you want to make other comments there?
I would. Jim made note of some of the participants. A CPA is helpful. I recommend that the finance director or whoever is in charge of finances for the diocese be a part of that. Social media creates a lot of liability for us. So HR, various areas there that can lend to the expertise of the group. Once the group gets started and is functioning, it will literally take on a life of its own. And we have in Fort Worth and in Quincy, they're doing this, solicited thoughts and comments from the parishes and churches, and they don't hesitate at this stage. It's your best, if you end up on the risk management committee, your best source of what's going on in the field. And as we like to say, St. Swithin's in the swamp is for St. Swithin's to stick up its hand and say, I've got a question. And that's how you learn. That's how you drive an agenda, how you find out what's important. That's where active shooter program came from, emergency planning. That's where that came from. The churches themselves will ask you questions, and then you can develop a program to help with that and make us better prepared for what's eventually probably going to come down the road. I'll be very available to you. Like I said, it's my kind of mission in life and retirement to help with this and make us better at ferreting out those issues and what are the best responses to that before we have an emergency. So I pray for you in that area, and I tell you I'll help all I can possibly help to get that started. It's very helpful to your bishop. It's very helpful to the diocese as a whole and to all the individuals. So I commend it to you nonetheless. let's go to Q&A.
Yes, let's do. And thank you, Rod, so much. If anyone is interested in interested in joining this committee, please email me, lynn.milagrano@anglican.doma.org. So I had some general questions with regard to underwriting. Who is going to be underwriting? Will Philadelphia be handling all of this? Can you all speak just in general how that will be handled?
Yes, absolutely. So we're independent insurance agents and brokers and risk management consultants. It means that we're not we're not required to represent any one insurance company. So we have dozens of insurance companies available to us. Having said that, not every insurance company, I'm sure as you all know, not every commercial insurance company that's out there really wants to write insurance for churches, but there are a handful who do. Philadelphia is one that has we've partnered with, and they've partnered with our church and organizational and nonprofit clients for a number of years. We think they do a pretty good job. I think they actually do a really good job with church coverage. But we also have the ability to access Church Mutual, Guide One, Liberty Mutual, USLI. There are any number of insurance companies that we would go to put together a program or put together options for you all for a diocesan-wide program. My sense is, and you see on the exhibit from of coverage that we have for another program, my sense is that Philadelphia will probably be very interested in partnering with us and partnering with you all to propose a program, and they happen to be the carrier primarily the carrier for the coverage on the diocesan program that I've shared with you all.
Wonderful, that's very helpful. Is there a minimum number of churches that would need to participate in order for us to be able to offer a master policy?
It's a really good question. The simple short answer to that is no, there is not. Having said that, on the agenda outline, we talk a lot about purchasing en masse versus individually, and doing so provides leverage. It gives you all leverage. It gives you purchasing leverage. It gives you again a greater mass. Typically results in lower rates. Lower rates results in lower premium. So we know that the greater the mass, i.e. the more participants that we have, churches that participate in the program, then the better the rates will be, the better leverage we have to negotiate coverage terms and conditions. Just as an example, oftentimes with individual churches, we'll see on their liability insurance coverage program, they may or may not have coverage for sexual abuse and molestation. If they do, oftentimes you'll see a limit of maybe $25,000, $50,000, or $100,000. We know that that's not enough insurance coverage. It's easier for us to leverage an insurance company to provide more robust limits and better coverage terms when we have a larger mass of, quite frankly, premium available to the insurance company. It's more attractive to them, and then they're more willing to negotiate.
Right. So the bundle then is very helpful in driving the premiums down.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So some of the questions had to do with changes that might occur once they were already on the policy. For instance, if a church purchases the building where before they did not have one, how would changes be handled? And would they be covered right away?
So the short answer to that is yes, you would be covered right away. How we would handle that, we would simply take that request to modify coverage for that individual church and submit that to the insurance company and say, for example, if we were looking at the exhibit that showed the characteristics of different churches, the third example and the fourth example, neither of those churches own their own property. But let's say, the church is ready to purchase a building, have a building constructed, and you simply call us and say, hey Jim, we're buying a building. We're going to close on it on June the 1st, and I'm going to ask you for some detailed information about that building. and we'll simply get it added to the policy effective June the 1st. Your premium will be modified. Obviously, if you buy a building, it's going to increase. Your proportionate share of the premium is then to the whole is going to increase. So accordingly, your premium for that coverage is going to increase because you have higher insurance values. But it's very easily achieved. It's something we do every day.
Going back a little bit to the billing. So the way I've seen that done, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you have a spreadsheet that has each individual church and the amount that each individual church is to be billed for that master policy. So the diocese would get the initial bill for the total amount, and then each church would be apportioned their share. Is that how that works?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, let's say if we were at the conclusion of this project, and I had all the underwriting information from each of the churches that wanted to participate, or at least consider participation, then the insurance companies would have given us proposals for property insurance, liability insurance, auto, workers' compensation, the executive risk or directors, officers, employment practices, the excess, the umbrella coverage. We would have the premium for the whole, right? It's a singular program. We would have the premium for the whole that would be provided to us. We then, on your behalf, because we've done this, with other dioceses, then we simply have created an Excel spreadsheet with formulas that are, quite frankly, quite simple. Where we take, again, we apportion that proportionate share of the property premium, the liability premium, to each of the participating churches and congregations. So we would negotiate the total cost for the diocesan program. We would then prepare an exhibit for you that would show your proportionate share of coverage, again based upon your individual characteristics, and all that totals in up to the whole. And once we are instructed to find the coverage, then we do so. And then we, on your behalf, unless you choose to do it yourself, quite frankly, but we on your behalf then are happy to generate the billing invoices and managing the billing and the accounting from the premium collection standpoint on our end.
Thank you. Those were some of the general questions. Have I answered most of everybody's? If you have another one, you want to put that in. Here's a good one from our Ken from church planting. At what point should new church plants participate? Can a new church plant enter the policy midstream? In other words, once the policy has already begun, if we open up a new church, would they then be able to join it?
Absolutely. So once the program is in place, the diocesan insurance program is in place, if you have a new church plant, again, we simply gather the same kind of information that we're asking for all the existing churches and congregations. Certainly the answers will be pretty brief and minimal for a new church plant, but the kinds of things that we would need would be certainly the legal name of that church plant entity. If in fact it has its own legal name, we'd want to add that entity to each of the policies. If they have any property that they're going to own, even if it's hymnals and those kinds of things, we would need to know the square footage they're going to be meeting in, or that they're leasing. If they're going to be leasing, they're probably more likely just using somebody's home or space, but we'd need the square footage, and it would be a pretty minimal annual premium for a church plant. I mean, you saw on the exhibit, the smallest of the churches that I described for you was one that met in about 1,200 square feet and had $5,000 in property and a very small budget, and their annual premium was less than $700 a year for a very robust coverage program.
Great. In your past experience, to what degree are the larger churches participating? Now, I know that you've done a master policy for the Diocese of Fort Worth, and I believe one other diocese in the ACNA. Did you have a fairly high proportion of churches participating in that?
Yes. The very brief answer is yes. The Diocese of Fort Worth is 55 or so churches in missions, and all 55 participate. The diocese, the other diocese in the Midwest that we represent, there are about 30 churches, and probably 25, 26 participate.
And if you,
The reality,
can I add
I'm sorry,
that the couple that are not on that Midwest, it's not because they don't want to. It's because one of them's in Florida, and you can't buy your insurance in Florida in the hurricane belt outside of the state. So difficult. But
let me, if I may, just to weigh in. I think part of the thing under the question is that probably inadvertently the examples that you provided all had a microscopically tiny annual income, which gives the impression that this is a program for very small churches that might have a building, when we obviously have, I don't think we have a church in the diocese that has a budget as small as the biggest one in your 4 examples. So maybe you could say some reassuring words about churches that have significant facilities or multi-million-dollar budgets and all the rest.
Sure, absolutely. What we know from experience, having done this for a number of years, is with the larger churches, whether they own their buildings or property, and regardless of their operating budgets and so on, what we know is that once they understand and appreciate the importance of having this kind of robust, comprehensive insurance coverage, and having the kinds of limits that we're talking about here from a liability standpoint, when they compare the cost of having this kind of coverage with these kinds of limits in a diocesan program, their proportionate share of the cost to participate in the program, when they compare that to going outside the program and purchasing as a standalone church, they'll see that the costs are significantly greater doing so on a standalone basis than it is within the diocesan program. And as an example, the Diocese of Fort Worth, their largest parish, by a large margin, St. Andrew's downtown, is they have very significant property values, operating budget, and so on. And again, they know that they're saving money by participating in the diocesan insurance program.
I want to comment there that the larger the church, the higher the impact from leveraging. So if you're talking smaller dollars on a small church versus a very, very large church, the same percentage means a lot more to the large church. I would say that. And Lynn, we missed a question up above about what is this? Are all churches participating at the same time? Jim, answer that.
Well, ideally, yes. And the reason I say ideally yes is because, again, the more mass we have, and the greater the values, the size of the program, the more leverage we have in negotiating rates and terms and conditions. So ideally, yes, we'd love to have as many that are interested in participating, having them look at jumping in on, as we initiate the insurance program. It's not required, certainly. And so should there be a particular church, whatever their reasons, let's just say, for example, discussion purposes, we put together this program and it's ready to launch. We're ready to put insurance coverage for the diocesan program in every participating church effective September the 1st. But for whatever a particular church's reasons, they say, we think we want to participate, but it's not going to be September 1st. It needs to be December 1st. That's okay. We'll add you December 1st. We'll add, your church, your values, your square footage, and all those other criteria and characteristics. We'll add you to the program effective December the 1st, but understand that in the insurance coverage, because this is a singular program, the policy dates are going to be the same for every church that's in the program. So if we initiate it September the 1st, 2020, it's going to be 9/1 of 20 to 9/1 of 21. If your particular church jumps in on December the 1st, then you're going to be covered from December the 1st of 20 through 9/1 of 21. and then you're involved in a part of the renewal process on a go-forward basis. It's very important for everyone to really understand that this is not a program where we take the mass and try to leverage terms and conditions and then place individual insurance programs, property and general liability and auto and so on each and every church. It's going to be a diocesan program where every church is participating within that program, and in doing it in that manner, that's how we leverage the cost savings, because you are a participant in the overall whole.
And that's how you get the advantages that you have in the program, and how you have the protection that you have, because everybody's got the same coverages. It just works marvelously.
Thank you. I am mindful of the time, so I'm going to ask one last question, and then, people still have questions. We can stay for a little bit. If Jim and Rod, you'd be willing to stay for another 5 or 10 minutes if there are additional questions.
Sure.
But if not, so grateful for everyone attending the call. We will be reaching out to you by email with more information. I understand this is just the very beginning of this discussion, and a lot of you have to go back to your churches and talk and pray. But wanted to ask this question with regard to a larger church. If once questionnaires are completed and a proposed insurance policy with coverages and premiums is put forward, and then a church determines that it does not wish to participate, will that not change the coverage and premiums for those who do participate? In my understanding, it might change the premium, but it would not change the coverage. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, very insightful question, and you're right. It's not going to change the coverage terms or conditions, but the premiums, yes, because we're going to, that particular church's share of the total is now going to be removed from that total, which simply it will require us then, the total premium is reduced because that church is now out, but then your proportionate share for each of the other participating churches would be modified, probably somewhat insignificantly, depending, unless it was, one of the really, really larger churches that would have a larger proportionate share of the program.
Great.
Lynn,
Yeah.
may I just suggest that we kind of end part 1 here. Maybe I can conclude and pray and invite anyone who needs to sign off to do so, but invite anyone who would like to stay on and have some further Q&A and clarification of anything that's on anybody's mind for a few more minutes. Just to say thank you to everybody for joining in. And just to be clear, the risk management committee that we want to form, as Jim and Rod said, it's our risk management committee that would be determining the levels of coverage of this program. That's not something that Frost Insurance determines, but how much coverage we would determine, and then that would be universal for every church that chooses to participate in the program. So we have corporate flexibility in terms of our coverage levels, but it would not be individual church by church flexibility to coverage levels. But by having a uniform level, that maximizes our purchasing power, if you will, by doing this together. So we'd be very grateful if you or some gifted person from your church was interested in participating in helping us form a risk management committee for the diocese. So please be in touch with Lynn about that, because we want to get that up and running soon, so that group can help us through this process. So Lord, thank you for this time. Thank you for Rod and Jim and their wisdom and experience, and help us as we seek to process all of this and consider it for our diocese. So continue to watch over us and Bless all that you give us to do this day. In Jesus' name, amen.
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 Jim, if you could close out your screen, maybe we could then see one another for those of us
Thank
who
you, sir.
want to stay on board. Lynn, are there questions we haven't yet gotten to? I think there was one I wanted to ask. Tom Herrick asked, because I know there's some church planting types on this. There was a question about, yes, a church plant could participate, but I'm not sure that it was exactly clear as to when a church plant should initiate insurance coverage. Is that the time they're incorporated, or probably before they begin public worship? But is there any clarity about when you start the coverage for a brand new church?
I would suggest to you certainly at incorporation, we would absolutely want to make sure because at that point you have a new entity, we would want to get that entity added to the church, to the diocesan programs.
Okay.
Until they're an entity, they're part of they're a part of the diocese itself, and/or sponsoring church. But once they have the incorporation, they are a separate entity. We absolutely want to get them added then individually to the policies.
Great.
They need the protection. If they're functioning at all, if they have a name, an entity, then they need the protection, and we want to add them. And it'll be minuscule as far as premium.
Sure.
Excellent. A few other questions have come in. Someone asks if this sort of insurance cost sharing works out more favorably than medical insurance cost sharing. You want to talk a little bit about how this differs from that?
I'm going to speak very briefly to that. While I am a licensed insurance professional with the ability to market and place health insurance and health insurance programs, I don't, because I don't know much at all about that side of our industry. Rod, do you know, would you like to take that? I just, honestly, I don't know the answer.
Yeah, I'll address it. It's apples and oranges. If you ask me, our system is in the United States on health insurance is broken at best, but it's better than nothing, and it's better than the rest of the world's. But you know, on the P&C side, this just makes sense. Some things about health insurance don't make sense. So this is what I did for 40 years before I retired, and 30 of that was with Frost. But it works better. Let's keep it at that. Let's make it.
Well, I'll just add 2 cents from a non-technical point of view, but from somebody who's been involved with the province and the struggles we've had with the medical insurance plan. Individual costs are so radically different in medical insurance that if you have a voluntary group, inevitably healthy people, younger people, healthier staff groups can get insurance more cheaply somewhere else, leaving the cooperative group to be older and sicker. Their premiums go up, and so younger people opt out, and it just becomes a very, very difficult thing to maintain. This is different. I don't think they're really radically different risk levels among churches. It's just simply a matter of pool buying power, rather than taking on a high-risk church and a low-risk church. It's just, as they say, they calculate it more based on square footage than they do on particular risk factors of a given church.
Agreed.
Exactly.
You're exactly right.
Yeah, and because each individual church is billed only for, I mean, it's customized, so you're not paying for somebody else's premium with this. So, does a small church benefit by having greater coverage than what they would maybe in an individual policy?
Jim, let me take that, if you will. And that's been addressed in a way, maybe not directly enough, but at the end of the day, what you're talking about with a small church is the same exposures exactly that you have in a larger church. The exposure is because it is more property than in a large church, it's going to cost more. There's more liability, and because there's more people at the large church than the small church, they have more income than the small church, but the exposures are just the same. And that's where your risk management committee and with the advice and counsel from people that have already done it has to find the right place on the spectrum. So yeah, a small church would not benefit any more than a large church. It'll benefit exactly the same because the exposure is exactly the same. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you.
You know, that Linda, that does give me though, it reminds me, you know, one of the things that we tell our clients and prospective clients all the time is, you know, insurance, and I'm certainly biased because I'm an insurance professional, and I've seen how what we do has been beneficial, you know, to a number of our clients in different ways. But at the end of the day, insurance is part of an overall risk management program. And we've talked a lot about the risk management committee and the importance of that risk management committee. At the end of the day, risk management is the process of identifying bad things that can happen to you that are going to cost you money, whether that's in your business, it's in your church, it's in your homes. It's really, you know, this could happen to me. What do I need to do to keep it from adversely affecting me from a financial standpoint, right? And so insurance is one way of doing that, but it's only one way. And you know what we really haven't talked about all today, and we could spend another hour doing it, but in addition to managing the insurance procurement and placement process, it's really important to us that we be good risk management partners to you, that we be good risk management partners to each of your churches, to the leadership of each of those churches, to the diocese itself, and to the diocesan risk management committee. To that end, we can provide you, and we will provide you with a very comprehensive risk management program that will be of no cost to you as part of being a client of Frost Insurance. So risk management, identifying those things that cost you money. And what's this all about? Well, from the context of our churches and our businesses, it's balance sheet protection. We're trying to help you protect the balance sheet, protect the assets of your individual churches, of the diocese, and help you be, you know, to the best that we can from our small, you know, part of your operational world, better stewards of the dollars that you spend for insurance coverage and for risk management resources and so on. So again, insurance is not a be all end all, it's a part, and but we are prepared and would look very much forward to helping you all from a broader risk management perspective as well.
Thank you. Well, we're at 3:14. What do you think?
Time frame. When might a questionnaire for the churches be sent out? When might we have that?
We have one posted on our website now, the documents that Jim showed us. So I can certainly send that out to our distribution list with a cover letter.
And is there a target time by which churches should get that in so that we can get a price that gives churches, again, in time to assess whether they want to buy in or not if we're going to move forward on a September deadline, September 1 start, I mean?
Yeah, so I would suggest to you that we would love to have, again, these are somewhat brief questionnaires that, again, if someone wants to call me, I'm happy to go through them on the phone with you to make it as quick and easy as possible. We would love to have all the questionnaires back by, say, June the 15th. That's 2.5 weeks. If I were to suggest a drop dead date, and which again isn't hard and fast either, but at the very latest, I'd love to have it all back by July 1. June 15 would be ideal. But if we have it all back by July 1, we can package it together, analyze it, get it to our insurance company underwriters, and then that gives them 2 months to analyze, ask additional questions, underwrite, price, and get us proposals. And
in which case we may be more on an October 1st start, because you're going to have to get a price back, and probably this is going to need to go to vestries that meet monthly to make this kind of a change. So I think realistically you need to plan on a 30-day window between the figures back from the underwriter and a start date.
Very good point. Thank you.
And I would throw out that as you work through this, you've got my contact information. I'm not an agent, but I have done this. I do run the risk management committee. So if you've got questions, shoot them at me. Copy Lynn and Jim, but I want to help any way I can. That's kind of what I do.
I just want to underscore that, because as a person who is constantly called upon to fill out forms that are perfectly clear to the person who designed the form and not so clear to the people who are trying to fill out the form, I want to encourage us to take them up on their good offer that, do the best you can, but then let them walk you through the questions, because oftentimes it's transparently obvious to them what's meant. It's a very simple question. We just don't understand it. So don't put the form on the back of the desk because you don't understand question 8B. Let's do what we can to keep the ball in play and move this process forward.
Answer what you can, and then pick up the phone or do an email.
Very good. Should we bring it to a close, Lynn, or was there anything else?
We just have one last question, but it's a really good one. So if you don't mind, just very briefly, Jason is asking from an administrative point of view. So the diocese would be the one, Jason, to receive and pay the total premium and then work to collect each participating church's portion. However, related to that, he's asking, is there a risk that delayed or non-payment by one church could jeopardize coverage for the entire diocese? And my thought is, no, the diocese would be paying the bill when it comes due. Is that the way it works, Jim? In other words, would it be on the diocese to make sure that we collect the premium?
Really, really good question. I can tell you that if you all preferred to have the billing and the accounting and the administration process work in that fashion, that would be, frankly, for us, that would be ideal. I would say that in our other diocesan programs, while we look to the diocese to help us, assist us when a church is a late payer, and unfortunately, but the reality is that does happen. Does it jeopardize the coverage for the whole? No, it really doesn't. But what we would do is, let's say we had 25 churches that were participating in the program, and 2 or 3 of them were late in payment. We're going to send out reminders, emails, and billing invoices, and say, hey, it's really important that you get this submitted, and we're going to involve you, Lynn, in that process. Ultimately, if the premium's not paid, we're going to look to the diocesan office to help. That we get this guy that has to be paid, whether you get it out of this particular church, we would say that's really kind of more of an issue for you to manage. Does it jeopardize it for the whole? No, it does not, because again, we're offering a program that ensures every participating church and the diocese within the insurance coverage vehicle.
And I imagine this sort of thing would be something that our risk management committee would make the final decision on. But it's good to know that individual coverages wouldn't be jeopardized for one late payer.
But I am hearing you, this is not a decision meeting, so I'm not going to press it, but you did say it was also an option that you would bill the churches directly and payment would go directly
That's
to
why we've done it up to this point.
Okay.
So
Yes, sir, that's right. That's what we've been doing.
And not to embarrass the bishop, but when Lynn calls a church that's a little bit late and says, the bishop would really like you to go ahead and pay that $250 that you owe. Usually it gets paid. I don't know how that works.
We won't go there. All right. Well, Heavenly Father, again, thank you for this time. Thank you for these wise and faithful leaders, and help us as we process all of this and prayerfully go forward for the sake of your church. Be with us now. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.